Every man needs another man in his life who's unafraid to tell him he's full of.
Hey guys, welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast. My name is Zach Reeser. I'm your host. And if this is your first time joining us, I want to say welcome. And if you're part of the Skilled Dad Society, keep coming back for more. I want to say welcome back. This is here for you. This is here for us as dads. And tonight, I have another fellow dad who's also doing some big things for other dads. He's doing things for you. He's doing things for men throughout the country, has been for a while, and he's got something new that's coming out soon that we're definitely going to touch on tonight. And I say night, it's night where we are. If you're listening to this in the morning, hey, good morning to you. You know, wherever you find yourself in the day, it's time to go make it happen. And I'm glad you're starting with this. But tonight, I've got Mr. Timothy Reigle with me. And I want to say, Timothy, welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast. And thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here.
So it's even later for you than it is for me. You are a stud. That's all I'm going to say. You know, put the kids to bed and make it happen.
Yeah, well, my kids are older, a little bit older now, so there's no putting them to bed. I just all right, see you tomorrow.
Fair enough. Well, okay, so how many do you have?
I have two girls.
All right. Two girls, girl dad. And what's their age range?
19 and 15.
Yeah. So you do have that good night. See you later. So you can walk me through and prepare my soul for that. When my little girl doesn't want me to say goodnight and sing to her anymore. Apparently.
Yeah, it's definitely got its pros and cons. There's, I miss the little girl coming on daddy's lap thing for sure. But, not having a babysitter or anything anymore, or any of that. And we can just be like, hey, order pizza. We're going out. There's some advantages to it.
There's,
but I do miss the little girl on daddy's lap stage for sure.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to enjoy it while I've got it. So, I don't think I'll have too much more time, but you've been busy. So like you've taken some of that free time and, got some good date nights, got some pizza nights. You're like, hey, I'm going to go write a second book. And so you've got a book coming out soon and I'm going to bring it up early just because I know we're going to dive into it, but, kind of a passion that you have from your own story that you've now taken and applied in a way that help other men. And that's Men of Grit into the Wilderness. And so that is coming out like real soon, as a time of recording. So I'd love to hand it over to you. Just give us a little bit about yourself, some of your background and what led you to write this book and the synopsis of, what it's about. And then we'll just take it from there.
Yeah, the book's called Men of Grit into the Wilderness, a 40-day challenge to renew your faith, restore your masculinity, and re-energize your family. And it's really been an interesting road for sure to get to where I've gotten to this point today. I had written my first book, Living Porn Free, a few years ago. And what that did was detailed my journey through porn and sexual addiction and how I overcame that and defeated that in my own life. And I wrote that as a guide for men to heal those addictions and repair their marriages and become better men and husbands and fathers after overcoming that addiction. Mm-hmm. My co-author, Jerry Adams, he had written a book that's called Men of Grit, Strong as Steel, where he had detailed some of his own journeys and overcoming things in his life and kind of turning his life around from kind of being, weak and complacent to being a strong, godly man. And so through the years, Jerry and I have become friends, and we both kind of had this vision. Like, okay, we both have a book under our belt, but we feel like there's something else there. And the thing we felt was missing was a day-by-day action guide. So it's one thing to talk about principles and talk about philosophies and debate all these things, and that's important to do. But the problem is a lot of men need action steps. They hear all these things online, they read these things, they read a good book, they hear all these things on podcasts, they do all of it, but they don't put it into action.
Mm-hmm.
There's that analysis paralysis thing that happens, right?
Yep.
And so we thought we need a guide for guys to say, hey, I need to turn my life around. I need to be a better, stronger man, a better husband, a better father. I don't know where the hell to start. So And it's just one of those things that you can't plan. And to me, I believe it was a God moment where Jerry and I were sitting around his bonfire one night, smoking cigars, just chatting, and we're both talking about our first books. And we're both, yeah, I have this idea. Oh, I have this idea. And it just came together, just one of those perfect things. It's a 40-day challenge. We both had the idea of a 40-day challenge in our head. It just has all come together. And so we
Mhm.
spent the last 2 years building this book and building this challenge. So it's taken um, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of study, a lot of examining scripture and putting things into place in our own lives and putting this book together. So it's a 40-day challenge, and it has elements of a number of different things that people would be familiar with. So there's certainly elements of like a daily devotional to it,
Mhm.
that a lot of people are familiar with, but it's also part daily challenge. So there's elements of like a 75 hard style challenge in there. It's not quite that physically demanding, but there is physical elements to it, and there's a set of rules that you have to follow throughout the challenge, and then there's a challenge each day. So
Mhm.
each day we have a chapter that you read, and then there's a daily challenge on how to take action to apply that to your life that day. So it all kind of came together, and we're excited for it to come out here and see the work that men will do and the changes they'll make in their lives.
One of the things I love most about that is it came from a conversation that you were having around a fire with a buddy.
Hmm.
And then both of you said, apropos to the theme of your book, you didn't just come with an idea, you took action on your idea, and now you're using it to help other guys. Um, so bravo to that. And I know some of our discussion in the community, for those of you that listen to this podcast or that are watching right now before, I know you hear me harp on it over and over, and I'm going to keep doing it because in the community with other good men around you, big things happen, both for you and for them. This is a great example of that. And one thing I'm curious about, so he had you said Men of Steel,
Men of Grit, Strong as Steel.
Strong of Steel. Okay.
Yep.
Men of Grit, Strong of
Yeah.
Steel.
So Men of Grit into the Wilderness is kind of a joint venture by the two of us. So Men of Grit is his first book. My ministry that I do of my coaching and my podcast is Into the Wilderness. So we kind of married the two together for this book.
I love it. You brought it all together. So your podcast, let's touch on that real quick. And then I kind of want to tie the two together. So your podcast is Into the Wilderness.
Right.
And tell us about that. How long you've been doing it, kind of what it looks like. And
Yeah. So I started that a little over 2 years ago.
okay.
And I just wanted to expand a bit on what I do. So the main focus of my ministry and my content creation has been focusing on the addiction side of things, specifically porn and sexual addiction. And so I do coaching for that. I wrote the book on that. That's kind of my main content type of thing. But I wanted to branch out a little bit, which partly led to doing this new book into other issues that men are dealing with. So through that podcast, I've interviewed other guys with on issues of faith and issues of finance, on physical fitness. I interviewed Jerry when he did his first book a couple years ago. Number of different things like that, relationships that we've talked about, just kind of branching out from my kind of niche area to talk about other things that men struggle with because they're conversations that need to take place
Mhm.
and they aren't taking place. You mentioned about Jerry and I sitting around a fire, smoking cigars, talking. Uh, those conversations aren't happening. There's maybe guys sitting around a fire, but they aren't having deep conversations, right?
Mhm.
They're talking about sports or the weather, or in the season we're in right now, politics, right? But
Yeah.
and there's nothing inherently wrong with those conversations. But men aren't having deep conversations to improve their lives. They're not challenging each other on how they become better dads, better
Mhm.
husbands, better leaders. And we need to have those conversations. So through the podcast, I've tried to force those conversations and be like, hey, this is something that a lot of people know about, a lot of people are thinking about, but they aren't talking about it. So let's talk
Mhm.
about it. And that's what I've been trying to do.
No. Um, we have a common interest and a common bond when it comes to that. And I love how there are more men that are going and attacking some of that from different angles. And so when we can come together and share some of those stories, even on a platform like this or a podcast or whatever, I've heard of stories that have led to guys then taking action, and now they're seeing some of the fruit from getting those conversations. But being that you've been in this for a little while, and now you've got your second book coming out, general question, just I want to get your thoughts on it. Why do you think those conversations aren't happening?
I think there's two main reasons. The first is the lack of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
There just aren't scenarios for men to come together like that. A lot of men aren't getting together and having those opportunities to have those conversations. They may be getting together, but it's not a scenario where you can really have a deep conversation with somebody. They're going out for beers or something after work, or they're hanging out when their wives are hanging out together, but there's very few times where just men come together just to be men and just to have those conversations. What an area that we focus on a lot in the book, just because our faith is so element to our lives, is the church, and the church isn't providing those opportunities for men either. First of all, men aren't going to church nearly as much as women do in the first place, but there just aren't opportunities to facilitate those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
The second reason is I think that men are kind of afraid to have that conversation. Men are afraid to be vulnerable with other men for fear of rejection or ridicule or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I found the opposite to be the case. The more I'm vulnerable and the more I open up, the more that other men open up in turn. And they'll be like, yeah, man, I feel the same way. I'm so glad somebody finally said it. But the problem is getting over that hesitancy. I think we've done, as a society, done a horrible thing where we think men talking about their feelings is feminine behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly men shouldn't be a bubbling mess and all that sort of things. But we've made it seem like the only way we can talk about ourselves and the things we're going through is in the way that women talk about the way they go through things. And counseling has become heavily slanted towards the feminine side. Mm-hmm. And they want men to go in and talk like how women would talk, but that's not how men talk. That's not how men communicate. That's not how they share their feelings. Men need to be in a place where it is, I hate the term, but a safe space where they can be vulnerable with other men. And I think that's the key. We're not going to be vulnerable in these, let's everybody sit around a circle and, hi, I'm Tim and I'm, and all that sort of stuff. You have to build those relationships and have that trust built in the first place.
Mm.
So when you have these close relationships, like Jerry and I, for example, where we've become close friends over the years, we can sit down and immediately dive into a conversation. Hey man, this is something I'm struggling with. Can I bounce some ideas off you or pick your brain on it? Mm-hmm. And we have those conversations all the time. So I think it's a lack of opportunity and then a hesitancy to open up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm curious. I was curious about what your thoughts were based on what you've seen, conversations you've had, and what I've found is very similar. And part of the reason I want to start with that before we maybe go a little bit deeper into, some of the premise of the book and specifically around the porn and addiction side of it, because that's not really something that we've talked about on this podcast a whole lot. Really, I don't know it's come up much. Some of the addiction side, but not specifically with porn. And I think that's an interesting topic because you would know more stats than I do on it.
Mm-hmm.
But because we as dads have that responsibility to also teach our kids how to do things. And what I've found throughout the conversations I've had and different things I've read is somewhere in the last few decades, the tribal knowledge distribution that goes down from grandfather to grandchild or father to son has dissipated. Whether that be with hard skill things, like the tools behind me, whether that
Right.
be some of the communication and how to even have those conversations around men, with the advent of technology that's come and kind of created these micro digital communities that really don't have any true connection at all. There's a lot that's lost in that. And so to your point of not necessarily even know what that looks like or how to do it, I think you nailed it towards the end there, especially where you said, if we walk up to some guy we just met, or you mentioned earlier, like when couples are hanging out and your wife's really good friends with, with the other lady, and you're just meeting the husband, and all of a sudden you jump into deep in the pool, like, I think that would be awkward because there's no relationship there. There's no kind of foundation of trust to even jump into those. But through the repetition of doing things together, or shared experiences build relationships. And so, hey, if you weren't taught how to do that, find some people that maybe have been, or we have to step into the awkward and start to figure that out. But no, I'd appreciate your perspective on that because it is something that comes up a lot.
Yeah, something you mentioned too is men doing things together.
Mm-hmm.
That's another difference between men and women. Women bond more by communication and emotional connection. Men bond by doing things together, and there's scientific studies about the the hormones and the neurotransmitters and things that are released when bonding hormones. And men bond by doing something together. It's kind of the old adage of going to battle together, right? Now,
Yep.
thankfully, or maybe not thankfully, we don't go to battle anymore. But we need those ways to where we fight together. We doesn't need to be actual war, but doing something together. Just guys on a team. You see how and when we were kids and we played Little League baseball or high school football or something, you bonded together because you were coming together for a common purpose, and you had that shared experience, like you mentioned. That's what brings men close together. Building and doing things together and fighting together and struggling together, embracing the suck together. Those are the things that bond men together. And then you build that trust and that connection because you went through something that freaking sucked. And this guy was by your side there and he didn't give up on you and he pushed you to be better and you pushed him to be better. And individually you might have quit, but together you pushed through it. And because you did that together, now you can trust that man and be like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can we talk?
Yeah. Men of grit. That's grit right there. And that's men coming together.
Absolutely.
And not only, I think also for someone to say, hey, can we talk? Like that takes courage, right? And courage is not being fearless. It's doing something in spite of the fear, despite the fear. But when you know somebody well, there's also the cues that you pick up on that it also takes courage to be like, hey, dude, how's everything going? Like, how is everything going? Not just how's your day, but like, what's up? I can tell something's off. But you got to be around people enough to understand that.
Right.
And so, before we move to the next kind of piece here, topic here, speaking of action plans, what are some things that you've seen or something that you would impart on somebody else that's listening to this? It's like, okay, cool. Like I understand the importance of it. I've heard of it. I just don't know exactly what I could go do because I don't have a community. I just moved across the country. I have people at work, but I don't necessarily want to involve all the personal stuff with just work colleagues. What's something I can go do?
Yeah. Well, the thing is just to take action to do something. It doesn't have to be this grand thing. You don't have to organize this huge expedition to something. If there's somebody that just call them up and say, hey, can we go out for breakfast? Can we go, grab a drink after work? Can we, hey, I'm building a bonfire out back tonight. You want to swing by? Something like that. Yeah. And put yourself in situations to find those things. I mean, for me, a lot of that has come through church, through building those connections. I have a group of Christian men that I meet together with once a month. We're the Christian Brothers Pipe Club. And so we're a pipe and cigar club, and we get together once a month and in my buddy's garage, and, we smoke cigars and drink whiskey and shoot the shit. And then, but at the end of the night, we go around the room and everybody has to, how you doing? What's going on? but even if you don't have that, there's other areas too. How Jerry and I met was through an online men's group
Mm,
called the Fraternity of Excellence. There's a number of different online groups, but Fraternity of Excellence is the online group that was started by a guy named Zach Small, who's a good friend of mine. And so he started that as kind of like an online place for men to come together and be that. And we have, I don't know, 3 or 4 Zooms a week now, where
nice.
guys can just jump on and one might be on fatherhood, another one might be on marriage and relationships, another might be on finances, another one's just kind of general. But we get a dozen, 15 guys on a Zoom and we talk about those things and are intentional about it. And so
Mm.
that's actually how Jerry and I met, because I live in Pennsylvania, he lives in Virginia. We're 300-400 miles apart. And we met through that. And so we started having meetups with a couple times a year with the guys from that group. And so we would get and get together and meet up. That's how that night around his bonfire, how this book was born, was we were on our way to a meetup with these other men to spend a weekend together. So there's opportunities, but you can't wait for the opportunities to come to you. Like I said, it's
Yeah.
about taking action. Yeah, you may live someplace where there's not a lot going on. That's okay. Start it. Like I said, you don't have to have this grand vision. You don't have to go, have this huge organization or this huge infrastructure or anything like that. If you know a couple guys, just call them up and say, hey, let's hang out.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that because I kind of poo-pooed the digital community aspect earlier on as how it separates, but it is such an opportunity builder too. It's all how you use it and moving things
Yeah,
in real life is a
yeah,
real
but
opportunity.
the online thing is the foot in the door.
Yeah.
And then the goal then is to take it offline. The online thing is the opportunity. That's the opportunity how Jerry and I met, and we have taken our relationship offline. And uh, that's the important thing. But it takes action to do that. And actually, one of the days in the book is talks about the importance of this exact thing of fellowship with other men. And the challenge for that day is by the end of the day, you will have something on your calendar to meet together with another man or group of men. And that's the challenge. And so it's not
Mhm.
just saying, oh, let's get together sometime. Everybody knows that's BS, right?
Right.
You
Yep.
know, 9 times out of 10, you aren't getting together. It's like, okay, what days are you open? You don't have to look in your pocketbook calendar at home anymore. Just pull up your phone. You know when you're free. You know,
Yep.
and you shouldn't have to ask your wife. If you do, that's a different conversation altogether. But um, you know, just do it. Just say, okay, here's the days I'm free. When are you free? Let's get it on the schedule now. No beating
Yeah.
around the bush.
Yeah. Just do it. Taking the action and going out there and making it happen. If you're not used to that, it's probably going to feel awkward, but that's okay. That's where growth comes. That's where
Absolutely.
growth comes from. And if you don't go to church, um, I always encourage checking it out. Now, I don't know where in the country you are and, what's being offered. If you're in the Southeast, there's plenty of them around. If you're in the Nashville area and interested, reach out to me. I can point you in some directions. But but there's lots of opportunities out there that, Timothy's talking about. So there you go, guys. If you've been asking, there's a couple things. And the underlying thing is go do it. And as you were saying, it popped in my head that if you don't go do it, nobody's going to go do it for you. We're all in our 30s, we're in our 40s, beyond, the majority of you listening. And, we're dads on this podcast and we're teaching our kids to take action. So, let's put our money where our mouth is. So, no, it's great. And then you guys going in and making this happen together. So diving into, this challenge, maybe you broke down one of the days for us, but like, what are some of the other things that you've laid out for guys to take action on? Because part of it is, around the addiction side, the porn side, the relationship, kind of renewing yourself. So walk us through that a little bit.
So as part of the book, we came up with a list of what we call the principles of a man of grit. So these are the defining characteristics of what we, after the change in our own lives, after examining scripture, after putting in the work, we said, okay, This is the list of the things that men need to be strong on. These are the defining qualities of a strong man.
Mm.
And so we came up with 8 of those. And for us, the first one is to honor God, because that comes first. Honor God. So that's time in prayer, time in scripture, doing everything to honor God. Number 2 is mission minded. And what that means is having a mission to your life, having a purpose to your life. So your family, as important as your family is, your marriage and your fatherhood, they aren't the mission. They're who you're doing the missions for, right?
Yep.
Your wife is your helper on the mission. And that's different for every person. For me, it's become helping the other men through this. That's become my mission and my
Mhm.
purpose. Yours might be something completely different, but it's the reason you get up every morning. It's the reason you do what you do. It's what you're fighting for. It's the journey and the adventure and the battle that you're on. And I think we oftentimes misplace that with career. Career can be your mission, but I think in the modern world and kind of I'm kind of a classic millennial, so I'll use my generation as this, work has to be meaningful. Work has to make a difference. Well, no, it doesn't. Work is what you do to get a paycheck.
Mhm.
Yes, you should be passionate about it. It should be something you enjoy. I'm a funeral director. I bury dead people for a living, right?
Mhm.
And that's meaningful to me, but it's not my mission. Right?
Right.
My mission is this drive that God has put in my heart to help other men come through the battles that I came through. So mission is the second one. The third one is to have a thriving marriage. So to lead your family, to lead your wife, to foster connection with her and intimacy, excitement, adventure in the marriage, to keep things exciting. So many husband and wives are just roommates. Their marriage has gotten stale, boring, predictable, right? We
Mhm.
encourage men to build strong marriages, to lead her. Don't let your wife wear the pants. You wear the pants and be the man and lead her.
Mhm.
Number 4 is to be an engaged father. And so we want to actively engage, express love to our children, set an example for our children, show them what it means to be a man. Don't tell them what it means to be a man.
Mhm.
They believe what you do, not what you say. I mean, what you say is important too, but if it doesn't match, they're not going to believe you, and they can see right through that. Even little kids can see right through that. And
They can usually see through the best.
exactly right,
Yeah,
yeah,
100%.
and they'll tell you the unvarnished truth sometimes.
Uh-huh.
But I think the majority of the problems in our world today can be traced back to the lack of strong fathers and the lack of good fathers
Mm.
and the lack of fathers in general, right?
Mhm.
A lot of the issues we've dealt with, you talked about earlier about not passing things down from generation to generation, because a lot of those generations have been broken up
Mhm.
and there isn't a father there. And so men are left looking for some fatherhood example and they're finding it in other places. And a lot of them are finding it through internet gurus like Jordan Peterson and, Jocko Willink and all these other guys, which those guys bring a lot of value.
Mhm.
But a lot of that is just projecting what you were looking for in your father.
Mm.
And so we need strong fathers. The next principle we already kind of talked about, which is fellowships regularly, which is building those strong relationships with other men and having that connection with men. That is just so important. I wouldn't have made the turnaround in my life if I didn't have men in my corner pushing me to be better, calling me out of my bullshit, and being there in the trenches with me. That's
Yeah.
what I needed. We talk about physical strength and becoming physically fit. So many men have become weak and complacent, and that leads to so many health problems. There's all the health side of it, but also just the discipline to master yourself. If you can master your body, you can master your mind,
Mm.
and vice versa. You can master your mind, you can master your body, and physical fitness and the discipline for that gives you mental strength, and you need mental strength to fight other battles in your life.
Mhm.
But it starts with having the discipline to get up in the morning and go lift heavy stuff and put it back down do it again.
Yep.
The seventh one I call pure in heart, and that talks about the purity issues and the pornography and the sexual sin and things that I was stuck in for so long. Um, that's something that almost destroyed my family. By all intents and purposes, I should be divorced, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
should be one of those dads that isn't in the picture of my kid's life because I did everything I could to destroy that. Not just porn, infidelity, all those things.
Mm.
But thankfully, the Lord spoke to me, and I was able to break free from that and do the work. And it was because of those other men pouring into my life, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that I was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many men fighting that battle right now. Um, Covenant Eyes is a software, blocking software for devices. And their numbers show that men, I think between 30 and 55, I think it's 2/3 of men are addicted to porn. You watch porn regularly.
Hmm.
It's even higher amongst the younger generation.
Higher.
Higher. I think it's 70 to 80% of teenagers to 30-year-olds. We'll
Mm.
say the Gen Z generation. It's even worse with them because they have grown up with the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 37, almost 38. So when I got into this sort of stuff as a teenager, was on the cutting edge of the internet stuff, right? In the early
Mm-hmm.
2000s, late
Mm-hmm.
90s, early 2000s. So, but this younger generation has had it from day one. And we've been sticking the device in their hands from the time they could hold one. And then now we're wondering why the hell they're all addicted to dopamine and porn. Well, what the
Right.
hell do you think was going to happen? Right.
Right.
And so we
Mm.
need to break men free from those addictions. It's destroying them. And it's not just me being a stuck up prudish Christian either. It's not. I mean, obviously I'm convicted of that. And from that perspective, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious the damage it does in relationships and the betrayal and the hurt that it causes your spouse, but there's physical consequences as well. Look at all the erectile dysfunction issues now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I like to point out to guys. You're probably around my age, I would guess, but
A little older. Don't let
okay.
the baby face fool you. Yeah.
If you remember 20 years ago when the ED drugs first started coming out, Viagra, Cialis,
The blue pill. Yeah.
pill,
That was
right?
the big one. Yep.
Remember the commercials back then, right? They were older guys. They were the silver fox, that found a new lease on his sex life.
Mm-hmm.
Now look at the commercials today. Look at the Hims commercials. Look at the
Mm.
Roman commercials. Look at the age of the men in those commercials.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the old silver foxes anymore. They're younger guys like us. They're guys in their 20s and 30s. And why is that? Because those are guys that are having issues with erectile dysfunction.
Mm.
Why? When should be at the height of their virility. Well, the issue is so many in those generations, in our generations, are addicted to porn, and it causes erectile dysfunction. So it causes shame and depression and anxiety. Something that people think will be an escape and a stress relief actually causes more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something we have to overcome, and that's part of this book too. The last principle of a man of grit, we say, is to be bold, confident, and courageous. So a man who is not beholden to the expectations and the external validations of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but is confident in himself, is willing to be bold in the face of opposition, and willing to have the courage to do what is right for himself, for his family, for his faith, and for his community, no matter what the world may say or think or want us to do. We know what's right in our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have the courage and the boldness and the confidence to stand up and do that. So those are the 8 principles that we expound in the book. And so each day kind of lines up with one of those and focuses on one of those principles and topics.
Dude, I'm pumped to read this book. I'm not gonna lie. Like I love I've not seen the full layout, but I love what you all have laid out, and you've done some of the big like core elements, and how you've packed it with the tangible like action steps. It's just kind of like, here's the easy button, boys.
Yeah.
Something for you to go do, right? Um, So I'm excited to dive into it. And when it comes out here, and guys, we'll put links and everything on this so that you can go check it out too. Um, as I mentioned at the beginning, the topic of pornography has not really come up much here. But as dads, and the fact that statistically speaking, a number of those listening might have that going on. Um, from your experience, like I'm thinking about anybody that's listening right now that's what's kind of going in their heads. What were some of the things that, if you're open to share, that you had experienced, and also where you are now? Because all the symptoms or all the results of what you had mentioned are coming from a place like, ED is happening because of a reason. The shame and the guilt's happening because of a reason. And so for those they're knowing they want to kind of be out of that, like, what did you find as you were going through that, and where you are now?
So what I found was that there was a reason I was going to porn. And it wasn't that I was just some horny bastard, right? And I think that's the main issue and the main mindset shift that we have to embrace is that porn addiction is not about pleasure. Porn addiction is about pain
Hmm.
and escaping pain. This isn't a sexual issue. It's an emotional issue. And so for me, I just thought, okay, I have the super high sex drives. I just lack discipline. I just need to try harder. I just need to have the right uh, program or tips and tricks and just have enough discipline and willpower, and I can have it my way and hack my way out of this. And I couldn't. For 15 years, I couldn't.
Hmm.
And so many guys are stuck in the same way. They might get 2 weeks or a month or whatever, but then they go back to it. Well, why? Why do they go back to it? Especially when it seems the stupidest thing you could do, you're on the verge of possibly losing your marriage, losing your family. That's where I was. Why the hell would you go to that when you know what's at stake?
Mhm.
Well, the reason is because it's not a sexual issue, it's an emotional issue. So we have to understand the why. Why are we escaping to porn? What are we using porn to escape from? Or what are we using porn to run away from? Maybe there's a void that we have that we're trying to fill. And that's the key, because
Mhm.
eventually the need for it, and when I say need, I mean emotional need for that escape and for that dopamine release, is stronger than the discipline and the willpower. That's why so many guys struggle at the 2 week mark or the month mark.
Mhm.
Because if you can be as disciplined as you want, eventually, if you don't deal with the root cause, the root emotional cause is going to overpower the discipline and the willpower. So we have to understand why. And so what I do in my coaching and what I had to do in my life is go back and say, okay, what am I running away from? And so I had to examine different things that had happened in my life, wounds that had happened in my life, trauma that had happened. And it's not always, huge red flag stuff either. I mean, I work with guys that have had sexual abuse or physical abuse or, you know, death in their family or something like that. There's certainly those things.
Mhm.
I didn't have any of those. I grew up in a great, loving, happy family home, but there were still things that happened and things that stuck with me, insecurities, fears, rejections, feelings of not being good enough. Those were the things that were actually driving me to porn. So we learn often at a young age that we can use porn as an escape. And that's why so many guys, this starts when they're in their early teens. It's getting younger and younger. I think about the average age of first exposure to porn is less than 10 now.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, it was, 12, 13, 14, right? And so when our brain is developing at that age, we learn to use porn as an escape. So when we're dealing with the life changes, hormonal changes, dealing with just teenage stuff that everybody goes to, we learn that this is a thing. And when we have these traumatic events or these wounds or these things that happen, we learn to use porn as an escape. So we continue to use that as an escape throughout our life.
Mm.
So I'll use an example from my life. I have this innate fear of rejection, which, so for me, writing a book and putting it out there and having people critique it is a big leap for me, right?
That's what I was going to say. Between a
Right?
podcast and now a second book, that doesn't
Right.
seem to fit the bill, but you're
But
stepping into it. So that's
it
awesome.
is. So, and a lot of that I figured out came from was different things that happened in my childhood and adolescence where I had faced some rejection,
Mhm.
whether it was from family issues or even like I had a girl in high school dump me in high school. Now that I'm almost 40, who gives a shit, right? Who doesn't get dumped in high school, right? But when I was
Sure.
16 years old and you have that rejection, it's like the end of your world, right?
Mhm.
And so I learned to fear that rejection. And so I or started avoiding things that would risk that rejection. So I didn't take chances. And I only went to things that were safe, that there was
Mhm.
no fear of that rejection. That's one reason I went to porn. There's no fear of being rejected by a girl with porn.
Mhm.
You're always the best. You're always the best they've ever had, and everybody wants you. And no one, no porn star has ever said no,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And
Interesting.
so there's a safety in that. And
Mm.
so throughout my life, anytime I learned that anytime I had something happen that brought up those same emotions that I felt when I was a teenager and those fear of rejections, I went to porn to escape it.
Mhm.
Even if it had nothing to do with porn or sex, even if it had nothing to do with the original rejection. So the original rejection might have been this girl dumping me in high school. Now in my 30s, I got my ass chewed out by my boss.
Mm.
But emotionally, I have the same fear as I did when I was a kid.
Mhm.
And I learned to use porn to escape that fear and to allay that fear and to find some sort of validation in that. And that's what guys are. And it's different things, but we learn that it's an emotional thing. And so it's not something that we can just hack our way out of. Yes, there's discipline and willpower involved with it. You need to have good habits. But the true freedom from it isn't found in the habits. This is something we heal, not something we quit.
Mm. Mhm.
So you have to heal those wounds and learn to deal with those emotional insecurities and fears in a healthy way. That's where the true lasting freedom comes from. So for me, I'm at the point now where I'm not having to, it's not like I'm saying no to something I have an urge to do. I fix the issues in my deep inner self so I don't have those urges anymore. I don't need to run to something to escape anymore.
Mhm.
So it's not just me having the discipline to say no to a sexual urge. It's me not having the urge to escape in the first place. And that's where the true freedom comes in, not on just trying harder or praying harder or having enough discipline.
Mhm.
It's something we heal, not something we quit.
That's a great phrase. Not because it sounds good, it does, but because, but it just, it makes you think about it in a different way. Um, you may have said this and I missed it, but as you're going through this, who did you
Yep.
have helping you get through it?
Mhm. So I had a good friend of mine that was a pastor of mine, and he really changed my perspective on it. I had met with pastors before, I met with counselors before, and it was always this thing, well, you need to pray about it, you need to trust God, and here's these Bible verses, and here's, or here's these counseling type of things.
Mhm.
Um, and he went deeper, and he said, you know what, he's like, you've made mistakes, Tim, but you're not a mistake.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was something that really stuck with me. And that's the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says I am a mistake. There's a lot of shame with porn. And so he helped me understand that this wasn't that I was just this terrible person, that I was just this horny bastard, like I said earlier, that couldn't control himself. He's like, no, you're something's broken in you, and this has become your escape. This has
Mhm.
become your coping mechanism, and we need to understand what that is. And he provided that guidance for me, but he also provided that accountability and that instruction and that support. And so from that, that's what gave me the courage to overcome what I did. This isn't something you can overcome alone. I tried
Mhm.
for a long time, and I know so many guys try because we're scared of opening up about it, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. We're scared of that vulnerability.
Yeah.
This isn't something you can get through alone. So I needed that guy, and um, that's what I tried to be now for the guys that I coach. And there's a day in the new book where we talk about that, and I use a story from the Bible. I said you have to find your Nathan.
Mm.
So there's a story in the Bible a lot of people are familiar with, David and Bathsheba, where he commits adultery, woman bathing on the roof and all that. Everybody knows that story. Nobody knows the story right after that, where the prophet Nathan comes and calls David out
Mhm.
and says, "You have sinned. You need to repent. You need to fix this." But he also helped him. He showed him the path to fixing it. There were consequences, right? He killed his friend, had his friend killed. The baby that came from it died. There were still consequences from it,
Mhm.
but he showed him a path to redemption. And so we need to find that Nathan in our lives, that guy who will tell us what we need to hear, not what we want to hear.
Mhm.
Yeah, every something I say all the time is every man needs another man in his life who's unafraid to tell him he's full of shit.
Amen to that one.
And
Yes.
so we call that your Nathan. And so we have a day in the book where we talk about the importance of that and the type of person that can be that for you.
Mhm. Find your Nathan. No, that's it goes right back to what was it, point number 5, like you said, fellowship regularly.
Right.
Because out of that, you're gonna get the opportunity to find your Nathan who can call you out on not just maybe your addiction here, but
Mm.
when you're getting out of line in some other areas, you don't realize it. You need somebody to kind of call your attention to it, which it can impact your career, impact all the things. And as we're
Right.
talking through this, in just a couple of conversations that have happened recently on the podcast, this is a Skilled Dad podcast,
Mhm.
and eh, people will ask me questions about it, and some of the purpose of it, and what skilled dad means. And some people have said, well, you don't talk about tools. And my response is not yet. So hang tight, boys. We're working on it. But all the skills that we use in our day, and kind of even going back to some of the things that you had mentioned before about not necessarily being in the tribal units anymore and having a mission, perhaps, B, having a common mission with other men because of being disjointed and not necessarily in community. Um, but if, from the statistic of 2/3 struggling with this, e- everything that we do as dads, we're showing our kids something, and some things are going to come out. And this is one of those topics that can impact our ability to be effective in other areas. And so therefore, we're not able to really go fulfill being kind of the skilled dad that we need to go be for our kids that can actually help turn the tide. And just tapping on something you said earlier, I mean, one of the big hopes and desires out of this, and I know some really cool stories over the last couple of years we've been doing this that's already happened, is that some of you will get a fire lit underneath of you and say, "Hey, I'm going to go be that guy. And I'm going to go figure it out, and I want to go learn, and I want to go learn the things that I can do to make myself better, so that I can be in the fight because we need some guys in this common fight of building our families and protecting our kids and protecting our families. But then also, that's not protecting just in the present day. Some of the protection is equipping them with the skills that they need to go and do and learn when they become adults and we're not around.
Right.
And so this is one of those things where I'm really, appreciative of you walking through your perspective on what you walked through because someone can relate to that. Um, and and I'm tapping on the importance of how do we strengthen ourselves so that we are the most effective in the combat of being dad to then go help build these future adults that are going to go lead the world.
Yeah.
And so I get a little fired up about that. But having this escape, and for some of you, it may not be porn. Some of you, it might be alcohol. Some
Mhm.
of you, it might be drugs,
Yeah. Or
um,
food. Food is a big one.
food.
A lot of guys are, um, having have an emotional escape with food.
Hmm. For some of you, this was me for a while. It's work.
Yeah.
And so
100%.
you know, there's a saying that came out of a couple different episodes. while you're doing everything for your family, make sure that you're taking account of what you're doing to your family. So, taking account on just all those things, and it can be a lot, but that's why you guys got guys like Timothy, and to at least have something in front of you that you can go learn from and have a starting place. But you know what? For anybody that's listened this far into it, I know that you listening or you watching have the ability to go and be a Nathan to somebody. And guess what? They can probably turn around and be your guy.
Yeah.
Sometimes giving to is even better than getting back. And then it just happens to come back to you. But
Yeah, every man needs a mentor and every man needs to be a mentor.
that's it. That's well said. So where can people go and learn more about you, about your book when it comes out, and I can point everybody to you so they can find you?
Sure. Best place to find me is on social media. It's just Twitter and Instagram, just Timothy Reigle, just my name. My website as well is timothyreigle.com, where you can find out more about the book, the podcast, and there's links to order the book there on too. It'll be available on the Amazon mothership on Saturday, October
Beautiful.
19th. It'll be available everywhere on paperback and Kindle. And yeah, you can find me there. And if you're interested in finding out more about my coaching or my one-on-one ministry, you can find information about that there as well.
Love it. Guys, I'll include all that information for you, so you go check it out. Go get a copy of this book. I'll read along with you. But ultimately, I just want to say thank you for doing what you're doing, for taking what you've learned and applying it for other men that they can learn from. And, that's where impact starts to happen. And that's where guys can get on a mission together. So I appreciate you, Timothy. And, I think we just touched the surface. I think we need to do it again, but probably like a pipe or a cigar in hand, around a fire somewhere.
Absolutely.
And, that's part two. We'll bring like a lav mic or something.
I'm down.
Well, thanks again, brother, for being on here. I loved it. And maybe we can do it again sometime. You can tell us about what you learned after the launch.
Sure. Be glad to.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, sir. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, as I said, you've made it this far into the podcast. I know you've gotten a number of takeaways. I feel like this podcast is about 10 minutes long because my wheels are just turning listening to Timothy and what he's learned, also what they're doing. And so, again, I suggest go check this out. Go check out this book. And hopefully, if you're not used to diving into different kind of books like this, maybe this is the domino that tips over that's going to get you diving into more, because that is a way that you can gain knowledge. But as you've heard me say several times, really good knowledge is great, but if you don't do anything with it, you're just good at trivia. So the next thing is taking action, just like Timothy has, just like a number of you have that you've shared with me and told me about things you're doing. And I'd love to hear about going and just getting a drink with somebody, having a cigar, maybe going golfing. Those are some of the stories I've heard. And so keep it up. You're doing some good work. And if this is one of those things that you struggle with, reach out to Timothy. If something stirred in you that you're like, hey, you know what? Yes, I've recognized that this has been a struggle for me, and I also want to get rid of it, because some of it is going to take desire. Like anything that we have going on, we're going to have to want to get rid of it and then find good people to help us do it. But then on the other side of that, you're gonna find some strength that maybe you didn't know you had, some effectiveness that you didn't know you had, and there's some great guys like Timothy out there. At the end of the day, we're all here as dads. That's our common mission. That's our fight. So I want to do everything I can to help equip you and build your confidence, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's leading it in your household, but you're not leading it alone. You got here on this podcast, you got all the people listening to it. You got guys like Timothy, his community, and several others out there. It's up to us to go find it and take action and just get it done. So take some of these things, apply it to your life on your journey to becoming the skilled dad.